On this very day, 12 months ago, Like a Dragon, well, not 12 months ago, 11 months ago, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii released worldwide to an audience who were very sufficiently whelmed. Now, I would have done this on the 12-month anniversary of the game, but Kiwami 3 comes out next month, and as if people already barely cared about this game, they especially won't care when Kiwami 3's out, because typical RGG studio and their inability to let a game breathe as they always have to immediately gut them as soon as possible, cough cough. For probably 10 months now, I have been thinking daily about this game, but not in the way that I tend to do with games I like, because yes, I did enjoy this, but my feelings towards it really do feel like a parent who's not mad, they're just disappointed. I've raced through thousands of thoughts of what exactly went wrong and how it could have been better, and now finally, after an almost year, I've managed to scarcely collate these thoughts into one video. And amongst all of those thoughts, there was one thing that I constantly kept thinking of. One thing that I believe was truly the biggest problem this game faced that caused it to be so memorably unmemorable, which I'll explain later in the video because I wanted to start it off by explaining what it was and what it actually did right. Pirate Yakuza, which is what I'll call it throughout this video, is of course the act of illegally downloading Yakuza 1 for the PS2, but it's also a game about pirates and a bit less so Yakuza. In Japanese, the game was essentially called Like a Dragon 8 Gaiden Pirates in Hawaii. This means that it was also a Gaiden game, even though it wasn't called as such in English, which meant that it was already very likely to be a smaller scale game with some more experimental gameplay features, but where Gaiden's main experiment was its ability to play as whoever you want in the optional Colosseum, Pirate Yakuza's was that most of the main story revolved around sailing ships and ship combat. The pirate stuff is what you would expect. You sail around to different islands to find treasure, and you shoot other pirates with cannons, and you board them with a crew of other pirates you gather, although the pirates are pretty much exclusively just ordinary dudes from sub-stories, the main story, or even other games. But when you're not sailing, you can run around the Hawaii map from Infinite Wealth, or the new small area of Madlantis, which is the same idea as the castle from Gaiden, except it looks nowhere near as nice, but whatever. When you run around on foot, you can do all sorts of minigames and other side activities as per usual, and you can also beat the shit out of however many people as you want with two fighting styles. These two fighting styles are Mad Dog, which is actually a combination of Majima's Yakuza 0 Mad Dog style and his Yakuza 0 Thug style. The second fighting style is a brand new one called Sea Dog, which has some things from other fighting styles, but for the most part is completely original. Combat's the same as it is in all the other games, but with Pirate Yakuza comes two new mechanics that are sort of based off older ones. The first is the Madness Gauge, which in Mad Dog summons a bunch of clones that copy your moves or will just fight on their own, and with Sea Dog you can basically do an RPG summon. Then the second brand new mechanic is that you can jump in the air whenever you want, which can be used as a method of evasion, or can be used to fling enemies in the air and beat them up. In the air you can press different buttons and perform different attacks, and in all honesty, the rest is self-explanatory if you just look at the footage in the background throughout this video, so moving on, I'll now talk about the good stuff that I liked. To start, I thought this when it was first shown off, I still think it after a year, but the new Mad Dog style, what an incredible way to make a woefully bad fighting style really fun to use. It's true though, as iconic as it became, the reworked Yakuza 0 Mad Dog style kinda sucked in 0, and then it just somehow got worse and worse whenever it reappeared, but finally it is now exactly how it should be. I remember a lot of people would tend to stick to Sea Dog, and I didn't exclusively use Mad Dog, but I won't lie when I say that it was probably in my top 5 fighting styles across all the games, so I used it a lot. There's also some of the nice things carried over from Infinite Wealth in this game. The Hawaii map is of course one of them, which I'm glad to see because I really do like it. Fast traveling from the map is sexy as hell. The Street Surf is basically the same, but now you don't get forced off it from encounters, so you can go straight to Mahjong as soon as you want and struggle with the fact that you are secretly Chinese. And also the camera, which was taken from Infinite Wealth, is just, oh god, it's so much better than all the previous games. It's kind of hard to explain, but just trust me, it's so good, dude. Another thing I quite enjoyed was the story. I won't go into detail on it, although there will be spoilers much later in the video, but I won't lie and say that the reason I enjoyed it is because of some emotional factor, or that the plot had me gasping from shock or whatever. No, it was instead that this story made me laugh more than any other Yakuza game. They've always been funny, relying on witty humor in, for the most part, side content, but there are plenty of scenes with some well-done humor throughout. It's one of the things they're known for. A few of the lead roles for this game were different than usual, so perhaps Yasuaki Uehara as director of this game wanted Tsuyoshi Furuta to write more jokes or something. I don't know. But it's got a lot more humor than usual, and fortunately, the humor is quite funny. Then another thing I actually quite enjoyed was the soundtrack, and I already know a lot of you annoying people are scratching your heads, but it's true. There are a lot of really great songs in this game's soundtrack, and again, another different lead person this time was Saru Yoshida, a composer who's been working on these games for ages now, directed this game's soundtrack. I much prefer Infinite Wealth's soundtrack, which was the previous game, but I do still quite like this, and I also wish to extend a personal thank you to Keitaro Hanada for doing like 8 of the 10 best songs from the game all by himself because he's a beast. Another thing I really liked is Oh no, that was it really. Which, you know, might imply that I think everything else was bad, but like I was insinuating at the start, this game's not bad. I've been getting annoyed this past year at how people have been saying all the wrong words in regards to this game and sending the wrong message to RGG Studio, although we all know very blatantly they don't care at all what we have to say. But there still are a handful of things I think were done poorly and other things that were quite good, which meant that, for the most part, this game was just a very middle-of-the-line Yakuza game. I think it was a lot better than a lot of other games I've played, but compared to the rest of this series, it... well, you know, the crowd goes... Let's start with the ship battles. It's a bit unfortunate that the main gimmick of the game is how I start the section of things wrong with it, but fortunately it's not bad or anything, and if you just exclusively do main story stuff, it doesn't get boring. However, there's quite literally no possible way for you to just exclusively do main story stuff, so it gets pretty boring. I'm not going to go into detail about all the things wrong with it and how it could have been better like I already did in this video, but I will summarize it by basically saying that it's just really repetitive, not at all exciting, and should have just stolen a lot more things from Assassin's Creed's pirate stuff to make it at least a bit more interactive. Because ultimately, most encounters boil down to spinning in a circle, holding R1 and pressing R2 or L2 whenever you hear a specific noise. And when you do encounters out on the sea or do some devil-like stuff with all those treasure islands, or if you especially do all the arena challenges, you will be doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's unfortunate that one of the best ways to make the ship encounters on the open seas fun is literally to just sail past them. If you do all of them, they're gonna wear you down really quickly, and even if you are trying to avoid them, they're just in the way. In all my save files of Lost Judgment, any reward from combat related stuff is irrelevant to me now, and yet there's still incentive for me to run around fighting thugs. It's fun. In Assassin's Creed Black Flag and Rogue, I'm always willing to go fight some nearby ships, and even more so the ones that are stronger than me because it's fun, it looks cool, it is cool, it's highly interactive, and I'll always get rewards that adjust to the difficulty. Really, it's a simple premise to copy as much as you can from what works, and there's such an easy market for RGG Studio to capitalize on if they did this. Children these days who are too young to know why Assassin's Creed has had so many games all flood the internet with their understandable in a modern context but completely incorrect in a historical context opinions will never know of the sheer magnificence of Black Flag and Rogue, two single-player pirate games with amazing presentation and writing and acting and detailed worlds, and most importantly, enjoyable ship gameplay. And in comes Pirate Yakuza, which has the perfect opportunity to finally fill the hole in our hearts that Ubisoft obliterated open, and instead of giving themselves more time to cook, they just microwaved the bitch and called it a day. The next thing I'll talk about is both the soundtrack and the final boss of the game. I know I already said I really like the soundtrack, but I can definitely understand when people say they don't really remember the songs. They're good songs if you go and listen to them on your own. In fact, a lot of them will blow your Ebisu socks right off. But if you've only heard them from playing the game, you may not think much of them, and that is the part that I can understand. The problem with the game's soundtrack was not what it used, but instead how it used it. It's a very apparent phenomenon in anything we do that the context surrounding a song when we hear it for the first time will massively affect our opinion on it. The great example I always use is that the final boss theme of Yakuza 3 will forever stick with people, even if it wasn't a good song, because the fight it plays in stands out so much more from the rest of the game. And conversely, even if the best song in the world played during a really shit boss fight, you're not going to think too highly of that song. So with this game, when a lot of things just aren't very interesting, they're not exactly going to get stuck in your head. But to explain by what I mean with how it was used, well, I have forever thought that in games with multiple fighting styles, the songs shouldn't swap whenever you swap styles. And considering this game very weirdly forces you into Mad Dog whenever you're in Hawaii and Sea Dog in Madlantis, then it should have really been that Mad Dog is the Hawaii battle theme and Power Unleashed is the Madlantis battle theme. That way you can freely swap styles and still hear a lot of the song, which you'll want to do because Mad Dog goes hard. I also feel like there are a handful of awesome songs that just get underused or don't get a chance to really be listened to. Trapdoor, which is another great song, plays 3 times during 3 small fights. Or the greatest example, and here's the final boss bit, I still think Devourer is a good song, but the fight really should not have had 2 separate songs that play during 2 different phases. It's like they couldn't decide which final boss theme to use, so they just used both. And because of that, you barely get to hear Unyielding Spirit, which if you listen to the second half of that song, Jesus Christ, it's incredible. And speaking of the final boss, the story wasn't anything to write home about. It was fun, but not thrilling or intense or emotional. Not that it needs to be, but in comparison to the rest of the games, it just doesn't help it to stand out. I really enjoyed the characters, but one character I couldn't give a single fuck about was the final boss and by extension the main antagonist with a question mark, Raymond Law, or Samoa Joe, because it feels cooler to call him that. He kinda, the whole game is like, why yes, hello Majima, I am a bad guy, and then doesn't ever bother trying to prove that. He kidnaps Moana, I think her name was, one of Jason's daughters, and it's supposed to be like, gasp, how dare you? But you barely know Moana, and then you don't even see him do anything. Like, if you saw what gave her those bruises, or if he kidnapped Noah, or he stabbed Jason or something, then you might want to beat him up. But I don't know, I just sort of don't. Samoa Joe seems like a legit super cool dude IRL too, so I just can't look at him and think he's a bad guy, I'm sorry. And him being the final boss is really just sort of, yeah, okay. It's something I thought probably would have made for a much more interesting final boss that I only thought of recently trying to finalize the script, was that I think Naomi should have been the final boss. I mean, I feel like she should have at least been a boss, but it was never to be. I think what could have been interesting is that you do the final long battle and it plays the obscenely amazing Sinister Gaze, then you get to the throne room and fight Raymond with Gold Devourer playing in the background, you beat his ass, and in comes Naomi and she's all angry looking and takes a swing at you or whatever. Then there'd be a properly animated cutscene, unlike how Raymond just randomly has a dialogue scene before his fight. And long story short, you don't know where everyone else is and she wants to take the treasure to one-up her dad or to force him to stop obsessing over it, or maybe she can pretend no one found it so that Jason would have an excuse to spend less time drinking and more time with Noah, I don't know. But then she'd also be pissed off at Majima because he's some random Japanese Yakuza dude who came out of nowhere and has put her little brother in a shitload of danger, and now her dad's been stabbed by one of his goons and she doesn't know if he's dead or alive or what, and so on and so forth. Dynamic intro against her and it plays Unyielding Spirit. Then you beat her and they have a heart-to-heart and work out their differences and blah blah blah. They like donate the money to cancer research. And then she recognizes that Noah's the happiest he's ever been in his entire life, and the whole adventures brought her whole family back together again, and then the whole thing of the real treasure being the friends we made along the way would make sense, because it's sort of like Majima teaching Naomi the importance of her friends and family, bada bing, bada boom. But anyway, another problem is that the game is really ugly. For some reason, a lot of the game has a really weird color scheme with the lighting. It's too bright in some areas, it's way too yellow most of the time, and the HDR doesn't even save it because it's really messed up. Weirdly though, nighttime actually looks quite nice, but most of the time you play it will be day. In certain areas like the seas, it can only be day. So look forward to really bright whites and just so much yellow. I also just thought about this while recording this. Can it even rain in Pirate Yakuza? I feel like I've never remembered a single moment of Majima being in the rain. Anyway, here's another thing that might be exclusive to the PC port or certain hardware or whatever, but I streamed yet another playthrough of this game on New Year's Day because I'm a loser with no friends, and it reminded me of a handful of things, of course. But one thing I completely forgot about was that there was a memory leak in this game, or at least I think. At around the 3-hour mark, maybe earlier, the game kept randomly stuttering for a frame, and it became more and more frequent as I kept playing. Eventually, in the final long battle, it got really bad, and then I got to the final boss, and it just literally crashed. I remembered that being a problem when it started happening, and I completely forgot that they just never fixed it. But now there's going to be some other gameplay related problems, although again, I've already said a lot of it, so I'll try to make this video shorter by summarizing things I've already gone over again with this video. I think that there are a lot of really good combat decisions that were sadly balanced by a lot of bad ones. The first one is the lack of a third or fourth fighting style. With Gaiden, which only had 2 as well, they could make the excuse that it was made in half a year, because it wasn't the best excuse, but it was a passable one. However, with this, they surely had the scope to add in a third one, because no one is going to complain about more gameplay in a video game. And I believe a perfect third fighting style for Pirate Yakuza easily could have been Slugger style, or even Slugger plus Breaker combined into one, but more so Slugger. The upcoming Ryukyu style in Kiwami 3, where your basic attacks are all sorts of traditional martial arts weapons and whatnot, would have made so much sense to have been a style Majima had, and that's what they could have turned the Slugger style into. They could have even made some of the treasures special weapons unlocked that you could equip, like ancient pirate giant two-handed swords, so then you can use the old heavy sword style from Kenzan and Ishin, for example. The Madness Gauge could get upgrades to fill it up faster, but without upgrades, the only way to fill it up was just waiting, which it was a bit of a wait. I also still think that what you use the Madness Gauge for is a bit lame, as you can very much use either style's special mode to just play the game for you. The Shadow Clones are really cool at first, but very quickly become overpowered. Much like how you can very quickly become overpowered because the rings were a super neat idea, but the bonus attack from them and the skill menu just made you way too strong. Being overpowered is always super fun in a game, but so long as it's not the standard way to play. There's also, of course, the most gargantuanly bad combat decision in the entire series, which was to reduce the maximum number of heat bars to 1. Not only does it look ugly, but it feels ugly too, and it's something you have to deal with for your entire playthrough, no matter what. It's super hard to generate heat too, unless you're drunk or have the ring from beating Amon, which it then generates like it's the Judgment games. Not to mention as well that there was a severe lack of heat actions and 0 attacks or special things that might consume some of your heat. Instead, anything that consumed heat consumed all of it. I remember there was a mod for Pirate Yakuza that added back a lot of things that were weirdly removed in this game, like a hit action on a downed enemy, for example. I don't remember everything that the mod had because it was so long ago, but I'm also not going to be like everyone on the bloody internet and just insist that the problem is nullified because there's a mod to fix it. It's still a problem. And basically every problem with the combat of this game just boils down to why. It's not like Yakuza 3 where the combat problems people have with it are due to it being older, and so decisions made in later entries just hadn't been decided yet. It's not like Yakuza 5 where a lot of the complaints about the combat realistically stem from an overabundance of combat encounters. No, most of the combat problems in this game are just from whichever people on the combat team saying, you know that thing that's fun? Yeah, let's just get rid of that. And apparently no one on the team said, hey, how about we just don't? But none of this compares to what I have and always will believe to be the biggest problem that Pirate Yakuza faced, which was that it was too afraid of being too short. For some stupid reason, the biggest criticism that Like a Dragon Gaiden faced was that it was too short, which is hilarious because the thing I've always loved about Gaiden the most was its length. Not to make a sex joke, but the length of a game is irrelevant. How you use it is what matters. Kiwami 1 and 2 and Yakuza 3, 4 and 6, they're all on the shorter side of the modern games and are all only a few hours longer than Gaiden, even if you were to do some side content as you played. The hours between them vary, but the game for me that I've always felt was really short and yet no one ever mentions it is Yakuza 6. Now, playthrough lengths vary between player, but if you were to look up on YouTube a full playthrough of Gaiden, the first result is 15 hours long, which includes dialogue scenes, text scenes, even some sub-stories, but just not the credits for whatever reason. All of the cutscenes from the same channel are about 10 hours, because Yakuza moment. So, about 5 hours of gameplay. Then you look at Yakuza 6, which has about 13 hours of cutscenes, and a playthrough on YouTube, which I think is also a fairly reasonable length, which also has all those 13 hours of cutscenes, some sub-stories, and no credits, is 18 hours. So about 5 hours of gameplay. Wait. So what? Yakuza 6 and Gaiden have roughly the same amount of gameplay? Yes, but have you ever seen anyone complain that Yakuza 6 is too short? No. Sure, your device is running Yakuza 6 longer than it would with Gaiden, but you are actually playing both games for about the same length. Even some of the side content in Yakuza 6 is just stupidly lengthy cutscenes and way too many of them. So if you were to do all the side content, it's probably the exact same story. And it goes to show that that criticism of Gaiden was ridiculous. A lot of people were sort of placeboed into thinking it was too short because the Platinum was an enjoyable experience, or because it only had 5 chapters, but it still had an equal amount of gameplay length as one of their mainline entries. And let me say right now that long games and short games can both be equally as enjoyable, but there are pretty much always significantly more problems with a long game than there are with a short game. There's like a 2-hour gap between the castle long battle and the final section of Gaiden. 2 absolute peaks of humanity right there. But like, Yakuza 0's first long battle is about 2 hours in, and you gotta play for another 7 hours before you get to the first boss with the dynamic intro. 7 hours between cool gameplay sections. And as much as I do enjoy Yakuza 5, it's like a billion hours before Shinada's section. I can beat Gaiden like 10 times in the duration that I have to do the boring stuff in some of these games, which means 10 times over I get to do some of the most exhilarating stuff these games have to offer. So clearly, its length was a good thing. Gaiden was, and still is, criticized for being too short, and this criticism very obviously affected Pirate Yakuza's development. Whether it was forum posts, official reviewers, or hundreds and hundreds of YouTube comments over the last 2+ years of people saying it at me as though I made the game, RGG Studio clearly were aware of this issue in big, huge, enormous quotation marks. They were so fearful of making another short game that they did quite a lot to artificially extend the length of the game. It's nowhere near as bad as Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise, that's for fucking sure, because fortunately, thanks to stuff like sprinting or a good fast travel system and the ability to skip more stuff, it is made much better than that game. There's also always very blatant padding in every Yakuza game. Sometimes it's fine and sometimes it's really bad. Lost Judgment's pretty good with it because the sort of random, seemingly pointless stuff will still be part of the story, but Judgment's just like, yeah, go follow this dude who's really slow because we paid good money for this, Kimura, I'll have you know. But the padding in Pirate Yakuza is the equivalent of trying to sign into something, and even though you clicked remember me last time, you gotta sign in again, and it does it to you randomly, like sometimes it's in the morning, sometimes it's at night. There's no predicting it, and every time it happens, you just like, why? Chapter 2 is of course the greatest example, where it's just a shitload of minigame tutorials, and in terms of actual story content, there's literally just a long battle at the end, and basically everything else is completely irrelevant to the actual main story of the game. There's also another part later in the game where you gotta fight Mortimer, but before you do that, you have to rank up at the Pirates Arena thing, which is fine because the thing you need to do actually will just magically unlock itself. Oh hell yeah, so they've actually cut out the filler? You might think. But then you get told about some cannon, and then you gotta go to the cannon back in Honolulu, which then leads to a small long battle and a boss fight and a few cutscenes. Then you go back and you try to fight Mortimer, but then you gotta go talk to Jason and sort out some weird thing with Masaru. Then you fight Masaru, and then there's a handful more cutscenes, and then now you can fight Mortimer. And it's just weird, because like, doing all that stuff doesn't take long, but why not just put the fight Mortimer objective at the end, instead of putting it right at the beginning before you do all this random shit? But even non-main objective things are weird, because I'll forever complain about the fog of war in Hawaii, and the fact that you still have to walk up to a taxi to be able to fast travel to it. It makes sense in an RPG, because it's sort of like a reward for getting stronger, that you can now go into new areas and explore them and fight stronger enemies. In Pirate Yakuza, they're all the same enemies. What are you making me unlock by hiding these things on the map? Mahjong? You serious? I understand that letting me instantly go from one side of the map to the other will make me less inclined to go run around and explore the hard work the map makers put into it, but then that's exactly what the secret treasure chests and the photo op things are for. That gets me running around without fast travel because I want to do it. But handling things the way they did is just done to slow me down so I don't beat the game too quickly, and that's the best way to describe the whole game. It just does things to slow you down in an already slow game. I complained about it when it first came out, I'll still complain about it now, but I hate how they just feel so inclined to make every sub-story automatically trigger when you get close enough, even though Gaiden did it perfectly. And then they're always just the same thing over and over again. Apparently they can't reuse fighting styles or fun gameplay mechanics, because why would anyone want that? But they can reuse the same structure to sub-stories and give you the same shitty rewards, and then constantly put in the same stupid characters from older sub-stories again and again and again. Whoa, Rush style? We can't ever use that ever again, that would be cruel. Anyway, here's Gondawara again. I will forever get mad because I can't ever play these games the way I want to play them, where I'll try out some side content if it seems interesting. Otherwise, I'll do it once I beat the game, or I just won't do it at all. Can't do that because there's always going to be some compulsory bullshit I have to do. But if you're a side content person, there's nothing stopping you once you've gained access to whatever. You can complete all of Dondoko Island as soon as you gain access to it, and just completely ignore the story. I cannot complete the story without having to do 3 days of Dondoko Island. But side content, it should never be forced. It's a reward, something a bit different to the usual. It's like if you're doing really well in class and your teacher comes up to you and it's like, "Mate, you've done so well lately, here's a little chocky just for you." Wow, thanks sir. You better fucking eat that thing right now, or else you will not be leaving this classroom. What the fuck? I'll eat my chocolate when I'm ready, dickhead. The new baseball minigame is actually pretty fun, and when you get forced into it, you can just instantly quit. But why not just do like a little pop-up that just says, "Hey, this thing's unlocked, you can go do it if you want." And if I want to do it, I'll go do it. I feel like a lot of these annoying things, like the boring padding, or some of the combat problems, or even some of the smaller weird things like how you can't hold the camera reset button to disable the auto camera anymore. Like, why get rid of that? These things would be so easily noticed by so many people, but I swear to God, the people that they get to do their QA testing are just a bunch of people who don't play video games. And when the developers are doing testing themselves, it's like they just blast their brains of all the knowledge from everything previously. They go to events like Tokyo Game Show and watch the people who start one of their demos and frame one gets right to the minigames and ignores everything else, and they are the people they get feedback from. You need casuals to give feedback in your games for a variety of reasons, but you need even more so people who are actually gonna play your games to be like, yeah, the ship combat is just pressing L2 and R2 every now and then, and that's about it. And a big appealing factor of these games is of course their plentiful side content, but if I have a bad experience doing something that was completely optional, whatever, that's fine. I don't have to do it if I don't want. However, if I have a bad experience doing something compulsory, I'm gonna be annoyed. Focus more on the actual games and just for a second chill out with the side content and stop pretending like it's the biggest selling point. I buy a Yakuza game because of 3 reasons. Number 3 is the story, then number 2 is the soundtrack, and number 1 is the gameplay. I do not buy a Yakuza game because it's got blackjack in it. Like, oh boy, I can't wait for Kiwami 3 to come out because it's got some other minigame with fucking Overtarian in it. Oh boy, better show off the same 3 screenshots 100,000 times at least once a day, every day, instead of doing something more interesting, like showing a cool bit of combat, or doing what Nintendo do with stuff like Xenoblade, where they just upload an entire song on its own online before, or when the game comes out, that isn't a karaoke song, for God's sake. Release the entirety of that Dark Tides battle theme and you'll earn endless money from pre-orders alone, Sega. It's such easy marketing. But then here comes another big problem with this game. Sega themselves. A lot of people recently have been saying RGG fell off. They've always had some stinkers. Look no further than something like Dead Souls, which nearly killed the franchise for the Western market. Pirate Yakuza's definitely not done that, but that's just what happens when you have a basically yearly franchise. In the old days, it was because the games were just big in Japan, and even then they weren't on the equivalent scale of of other yearly franchises like COD and Assassin's Creed in the West. They reuse a lot of assets and scratch things together quickly so that they don't cost that much money to make, and then they can always guarantee that even a poorly performing game will get their money back. But these days, they're so much bigger than they used to be, and Sega are so much more confident in the series doing well that they put all of them on PC, they've put in the effort to localize them in English internally again, they've started doing localizations in all sorts of other languages too. They've gone way more crazy with the special events, they've gone through the effort of working with companies to ship their merch internationally because they know people will buy it. They started putting fucking vending machines in big parts of Tokyo because there's pretty much not a soul on earth who doesn't know who Kazuma Kiryu is. And yet they're still developing these games like no one's gonna buy them. They scramble to get shit done and just kind of release them, and then they do like maybe 2 updates. They never do any post-launch DLC except for one time, and then not even 12 months pass and bam, new entry to overshadow the previous one. They finally have the chance to be better. And they just said, fuck it, we're not going to do that. There's a lot of people very obviously suffering franchise fatigue because they play all of these games that are way too similar, and when they finally do something different with like the turn-based games, it's 2 games in a sea of like 10 new games, new ports, remasters, whatever, that are all the goddamn same thing. Other franchises, when they do spin-offs, other smaller projects, remakes, remasters, you can always tell the scope of a game just by looking at it. I can look at the new Final Fantasy Tactics and see, okay, yeah, this is a remake of a PS1 game and it's cheaper than Final Fantasy 16. This game is a remake of a spin-off. I'm not going to raise my expectations for it. And then you play it and you'll be like, damn, this is awesome. I've made the right decision with this game. You look at Pirate Yakuza, Kiwami 3, and Lost Judgment. They're all the same price, they all look like the same game, but Lost Judgment is a big game with a shit ton of gameplay, story, side content. It's got a lot, but guess what? It's the fucking spin-off! Then you can go play mainline remake Kiwami 3, and it's so obviously got so little to set it apart, they ship it with a second game. They're so inconsistent with the effort they put into their games, and as a consumer, you never know whether or not the game you play will be the half-assed, made in 10 weeks, copied everything from the last game, or if it's going to be the new hotness, billion hours of goated content game. And it's biting them on the ass. Not only has the bar been raised by outliers like Lost Judgment, which is like sex itself, but they themselves are raising the stakes. Go marry a fucking Yakuza character. Do you think that's the sort of premise they can confidently enact if the series would die because they spent 2 years on a game instead of 1? Hell no. Pirate Yakuza is such a perfect example of them needing to be more confident in spending more time developing games, or being more confident that they are making a smaller game. Do not hide the fact that your game is small. Embrace it. Plenty of other people have small games, and I'm sure your girlfriend thinks you've got a great personality. But they didn't want to do that, and instead made a very bland and boring game that people were really interested in before it came out. Then after it came out, no one really cared. You could easily say that it's my own fault, but I know from my own videos and live streams that people were less interested in Pirate Yakuza. I know from community discussion that people were less interested. I don't watch her stuff, so maybe I'm wrong, but I remember when the game was brand new and Kiara from HoloLive was playing through it, and even her streams of the game weren't as popular as some of the other games she was playing around the same time. The only thing that really stands out about Pirate Yakuza is the fact that the game doesn't stand out. But it's not just RGG Studio making something not very interesting. Sega too need to just stop blowing their load on Game Awards trailers that cost $1 billion gazillion to show off a bunch of retro game reboots and then go radio silent on all but one of them, or announcing a brand new IP from one of their top studios only for said top studio to have nothing to show off besides one trailer, and they still can't even tell you what the actual game is going to play like. Don't bother asking those sorts of questions, consumers. Just buy a shirt with the logo on it. I personally believe that the reason why Sega haven't gone under, and likely will never go under, despite their 17 downfalls throughout time, is purely thanks to Sonic fans. I'm not saying this to make fun of you, but they can make a Sonic game that just drains you of your blood until you're nearly dead, and it can have zero marketing, but it's got Shadow the Hedgehog in it, and bam, 1 billion copies have been sold. Glory to Shadow. So then Sega get the wrong idea about their other games and just go, yeah, just do whatever, who cares? Stop making that Total War game, dude, we've got a Lawbreakers clone to cancel. They easily can, and in fact should do to the Yakuza series what Square Enix did with Final Fantasy. They created a whole bunch of games so closely together, and although to Final Fantasy fans they all stand out, 1 to 3 play very similarly and are all NES games. 4 to 6 is the same but SNES, and 7 to 9 are the same but on PS1. But then in comes Final Fantasy X on the PS2, and even the other games on the PS2 are literally nothing at all like it. 25 years later, and there still is nothing like Final Fantasy X. And you could argue that later games aren't as good as 10, and in many instances you'd be very right. 10 goes exceptionally hard, but because of that, people are still buying 10. They remaster it and no one is hesitating to go get that shit again. People are still talking about it, people are still playing it. No one besides stupid YouTubers who said the voice acting is bad look back at 10 and think it was a waste. Even the sequel to the game is nothing like it. That wouldn't have happened in quite the same way if 11 and 12 were basically just the same thing again but with a different story. Meanwhile, once again, not even a month from this video coming out will the words Pirate Yakuza ever be muttered from anyone's mouth ever again, because Kiwami 3, even if it's worse than Pirate Yakuza, will just fill the same role as it once did. But in fairness, it could be worse. Could be a lot worse, in fact. You could be a Titanfall fan.